President Dina Boluarte urged Congress on Friday to approve an early election for 2023. President Nicolás Maduro held a meeting with the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights in Caracas. And demonstrations by the Muslim community in Afghanistan continue against the burning of the Koran in Sweden. Hello, welcome to teleSUR English. I am Estefania Bravo from the headquarters of Quito in Ecuador. This is from the south. Peruvian President Dina Boluarte urged the Congress on Friday to approve an early election for 2023, despite the fact that general elections are scheduled for April 2024. As a way of the crisis the country is going through and in response to one of the main demands of the protests taking place in the country. In his speech, Boluarte acknowledged that the people are saying and asking for earlier elections, for which reason initially his government had proposed April 2024 as the date for the elections. A bill that was approved in Congress in the first vote and must be ratified in the second vote. After more than 60 people killed by police repression in Peru, the government announced that its security forces will clear the roads blocked by protesters. The roadblocks have extended along Lima's main highway, blocking the way to the cities of Huancayao, Huanaco, and Cerro de Pasco. The Ombudsman's office asked to lift the roadblocks to avoid situations that could deprive police repression following the government's announcement that it would begin clearing the highways. The executive indicated that the supply of basic products is running low in several cities of the country due to roadblocks. President Nicolás Maduro held a meeting with the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, at the Miraflores Palace in the city of Caracas. The meeting was in response to an invitation made by the national government, the purpose of which is to implement existing mechanisms of constructive dialogue, cooperation, and technical assistance between Venezuela and the Office of the High Commissioner. During the meeting, they reviewed the progress made by the national government in the field of human rights, and at the same time, the need to lift the illegal sanctions imposed by the U.S. against the country was convened. This is the second visit made to Venezuela by a UN High Commissioner after the visit of former Chilean President Michelle Bachelet in 2019. And previously, Venezuela's Vice President Delcy Rodriguez held a meeting with the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights in order to review the common agenda and bilateral issues. The UN Commissioner will meet with various authorities of the national government and civil society groups. The High Commissioner's visit responds to the implementation of a constructive dialogue, cooperation, and technical assistance between the Bolivarian government and the office under his charge. The Venezuelan Vice President announced in Geneva in 2022 the impact of the economic measures imposed by the government of the U.S. For the first time in Venezuela, coke is being processed, a petroleum byproduct used, among other things, to produce aluminum and iron. It was the workers who promoted the technology with 100% of Venezuela's hands, and a company that was abandoned by the French transnational Total Energy is now in the hands of workers' control. The story with our correspondent, Madeleine Garcia.
What is being heard is the heart of the Carbonarca company, which is part of CVG, a Venezuelan corporation of Guyana, the non-oil strategic industries complex. However, it was previously owned by the oil company Total Energy. They processed bauxite extracted from Venezuela and transported it to France. A decade ago, they abandoned it, leaving 130 workers behind. 2 years ago, after the illegal U.S. blockade, they reinvented coke processing technology for the first time in Venezuela.
Most of these companies were created with foreign technology from Germany, France, the US, and with its blockade, you couldn't even bring a screw that you needed, because the technology is made so that you have to use the screw that they sell. So what we've done is we've managed to develop this technology here in Guyana, here in Venezuela, by substituting imports.
Not only did they manage to adapt the installations with great honor to replace the technology, the spare parts and the parts, but also the raw product. Coke, which until recently was considered a waste product of the oil industry, is what these mountains of black sand dunes look like. The myth was that Venezuelan coke was useless. The calcinated coke was imported from Venezuela.
The calcined coke was brought from abroad. It was practically imported at $1,000 a ton. We had the product here in Venezuela and we calcinated now, replacing the production of that coke, where we are saving $200 million. That is what was paid here in Venezuela.
With the calcinated coke, we produce these carbon anodes that are used for the processing of the aluminum in another strategic company, which is Venezuelan. This is the production chain. In the cells, you can see 100% Venezuelan anodes.
The old rentier model was not profitable for the company because it was dependent on the state subsidy through the oil revenues. Today, it is not. Today we have national production with national products and spare parts and supplies. We have replaced a large quantity of imported products and the second main raw material, which is coke, we are producing it in Venezuela. We are making the company sustainable for the first time and we are contributing aluminum, 280 tons a day to the industry and to the national production.
Carbon Arca's every movement is tracked by this technological platform, also designed in Venezuela and adapted to reality. It is the calcinous computer brain.
And that we, as Venezuelans, are helping the aluminum sector to reduce its costs in order to be able to sell more and use that profit to pay the teachers, to pay the economy. We are proud because this is an innovation that has not been done in the world until the Venezuelans were able to do it.
This whole process has also reinvigorated the private sector. They are working on building the second line of the calciner, which means growing coke.
For us here in Guyana, it's like reviving the basin companies and to give work to the people who need it, to the cabilleros, bricklayers, master builders, engineers. There is progress here in the city.
The lighters do not stop, and neither do the workers' production councils until we manage to export the Venezuelan calcinated coke.
Madeline Garcia, teleSUR, Estado Bolívar, Venezuela.
We're taking our first break now. Join us again after this, and also don't forget to follow us on our TikTok account at teleSUR English for more news. Stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. In the United States, thousands of nurses could be working with fake academic credentials after federal officials uncovered alleged fraud at 3 South Florida schools, media reported on Friday. The frauds took place between 2016 and 2021. The Justice Department reported that Siena College, Palm Beach Nursing School, and Sacred Heart International Institute, now closed, issued more than 7,600 fake nursing degrees. The indictments include more than 24 people from different states who could face up to 20 years in prison. The fake nurses worked in a variety of settings, including with homebound children, assisted living facilities, and Veterans Affairs in Ohio, New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, Georgia, Maryland, and Texas. The president of the American Nurses Association, Jennifer Mensick Kennedy, called the coordinated conspiracy disturbing and deeply troubling. German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock stated on Friday at the Parliamentary Assembly of the European Council that the European Union is at war with Russia. The statement provoked negative reactions inside and outside the German borders. The president of Croatia, Zoran Milanovic, declared that he was unaware of such a conflict and wished the German official a much better luck than her country and the Second World War. Moscow has repeatedly affirmed that it will destroy any weapon system of Western origin entering the territory of Ukraine. Russia's defense ministry said on Friday that long-range strikes on Ukraine a day earlier had disrupted the transportation of weapons and ammunition, including those supplied by the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Defense Ministry spokeswoman Igor Konashenkov stated the strikes were performed using long-range precision weapons, air and sea-based, as well as unmanned aerial vehicles, which allowed to accomplish the mission. Konashenko reaffirmed that the work of the production facilities of enterprises for the repair and the restoration of military equipment of Ukraine armed forces was disrupted. He further added that the goals of the massive strike have been achieved. On Friday, Russian President Vladimir Putin accused Ukraine of committing neo-Nazi crimes. Via a video conference marking International Holocaust Remembrance Day, Putin said that forgetting the lessons of history leads to repeating terrible tragedies evidenced by the crimes against civilians, ethnic cleansing, and punitive actions organized by neo-Nazis in Ukraine against Russian-speaking populations. He noted that it is against this evil that Russian soldiers are bravely fighting in Ukraine. Putin also said that any attempt to revise Russia's contribution to the great victory in World War II tantamounts to justifying crimes of Nazism and paves the way for the revival of its criminal ideology. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres warned this Friday, January 27th, about the risk of violent extremism and terrorism at the commemoration of the International Day of the Remembrance of Victims of the Holocaust. Guterres warned that the Holocaust was the culmination of millennia of anti-Semitic hatred, and the painful truth is that anti-Semitism is everywhere.
And at its essence, Holocaust remembrance is a call to be on constant alert, never to be silent in the face of hate, never tolerant of intolerance, never indifferent to the suffering of others. Survey after survey arrives at the same conclusion: anti-Semitism is at record highs. And what is true for anti-Semitism is true for other forms of hate: racism, anti-Muslim bigotry, xenophobia, homophobia, misogyny. Neo-Nazi, white supremacist movements are becoming more dangerous by the day. In fact, they now represent the #1 internal security threat in several countries and the fastest growing. Today, I'm issuing an urgent appeal to everyone with influence across the information ecosystem: regulators, policymakers, technology companies, the media, civil society, and governments. Stop the hate, set up guardrails, and enforce them. All have a role to play. We can never let hate have the last word. We cannot allow old hatreds to find new outlets and impunity on digital platforms. And together, we must confront falsehoods with facts, ignorance with education, indifference with engagement. Because never again means telling the story again and again.
The second round of the presidential elections in the Czech Republic is held on Friday in a context of threats and parity between the two candidates. Peter Pavel, a retired general, leads the polls with 57.6% against former Prime Minister Andrej Babis, who has a 42.2% approval. Pavel had to deny the day before information about his alleged death, a fact that is under investigation by the authorities, while Babis's wife received a letter with insults from her husband's detractors and a bullet inside. Babis had been questioned by the European Union during his tenure as head of government over immigration policies and accusations of conflicts of interest with respect to his complaints. The results of the elections will be announced on Saturday night. We're taking our last break now. Join us again after this, and also don't forget to follow me on my Twitter at @teleSUR for more. Stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. More news now. Demonstrations by the Muslim community in Afghanistan continue against the burning of the Koran in Sweden on January 21st. Demonstrations against the burning were also reported in Pakistan, Iraq, and Lebanon. Afghan authorities demanded that the Swedish government take appropriate action against the perpetrator and against Islamophobic and anti-Muslim behaviors in their territory. Relations between Turkey and Sweden, which had already been affected by the Nordic countries' request to join NATO, were even more compromised by the burning of Islam's holy book. The Malian government refuses to increase the size and capabilities of the UN mission in the country, MINUSMA. The issue was debated in the UN Security Council, to which the Malian foreign minister was invited. A report on January 6 had detailed that in the previous 3 months, MINUSMA was unable to carry out 237 air missions due to lack of takeoff permission by the Malian government, in addition to other restrictions on ground movements. Mali's foreign minister said his government believes that its main challenge is to adapt its mandate to the new security environment, and that unfortunately the UN report did not reflect the point of view. The criticism of the Malian government came exclusively from Western countries and their allies, while the 3 African countries on the council, Ghana, Gabon, and Mozambique, omitted any critical reference to Bamako. Sudan said that Khartoum and Addis Ababa are aligned and in agreement on the controversial Ethiopian dam on the Blue Nile. Burhan's remarks came during a meeting on Thursday with Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, who was on a day's visit to Khartoum, his first since Burhan led a 2021 military coup. The dam has been the source of tensions between Ethiopia and downstream countries, Egypt and Sudan, ever since work began in 2011. Multiple rounds of talks between the 3 governments have failed to produce an agreement over the filling and observation of the reservoir. Egypt is dependent on the Nile for irrigation and drinking water, and the Blue Nile accounts for more than 80% of its flow.
The surrounding environment as well. Sudan, Egypt, and Ethiopia have long tried to.
Residents in Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo, were on Friday preparing for a long-awaited visit by Pope Francis as part of his tour to the country and neighboring South Sudan next week. The pontiff will arrive in Congo's capital on January 31st, where he's expected to be greeted by huge crowds in the nation with a large Catholic presence. He will then travel to Juba, South Sudan, on February 3rd to join the faithful for masses, which millions are expected to attend. The last time a pope visited Kinshasa was in August 1985, when John Paul II visited. Vatican ambassador to the Democratic Republic of Congo, Archbishop Ettore Balez-Pro, said the trip was a way to turn on the spotlight on humanitarian issues in the country. The United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights regrets Myanmar's regression in the fields of rights 2 years after the 2021 military coup. According to the UN Human Rights Agency, at least 2,890 people have been killed in the past 2 years at the hands of military, while 767 of them have died after being detained. The military seized power on February 1st, 2021, alleged fraud in favor of the Civilian National Democratic League, the NLD party, in the general election held weeks earlier. Then President Win Myint and the NLD leader and Nobel Peace Prize winner Aung San Suu Kyi were imprisoned, put on trial, and sentenced. Entire populations have been displaced, and armed resistance groups have emerged mainly in the border provinces, increasing the climate of crisis and violence which affects Myanmar's 55 million people. The country is also known by its former name of Burma.
Despite clear legal obligations for the military to protect civilians in the conduct of hostilities, there has been consistent disregard for the related rules of international law. Far from being spared, civilians have been the actual targets of attacks, victims of targeted and indiscriminate artillery barrages and airstrikes, extrajudicial executions, the use of torture, and the burning of whole villages.
And Vietnam commemorates 50 years since the signing of the Paris Accords, which ended the war in January 1973. Vietnamese Foreign Affairs Minister Bu Thanh Son underscored that independence, resilience, and integrity have been the nation's principles throughout history. The signing of the Paris Agreements finalized the longest and most complicated negotiation in the history for the welfare of the Vietnamese people. And the signing of the agreements was also recorded as a resounding victory of Vietnam's revolutionary diplomacy during the Ho Chi Minh era, contributing greatly to the triumph of the entire nation and leaving valuable diplomatic lessons on independence, autonomy, and international solidarity. The Paris negotiations have gone down in Vietnam's history as a difficult struggle of Hanoi with Washington. And with that story, we've come to the end of this news brief, but remember, you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also be sure to follow us on our socials. We're on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram as well. For Telesur English, I am Estefania Bravo. Until next time.